Hello, Math 96. Happy Monday. So we're going to do notebook page 93 today. At the top of that page, if you can write down the essential question, how are imaginary numbers used to simplify radicals? And by the end of this video lesson, you should be able to say that you can simplify square roots containing negative numbers using I, the imaginary number. Tonight's homework, you need to catch up on missing notes and homework, please. Okay. There we go. I just wanted to show you this screen because you should be familiar with it as you're advancing into college and things. So this is the number system. It's broken up into two parts, the real numbers and the imaginary numbers. And that's what we're going to work on today is the imaginary numbers. Now, just to remind you, to the left side is all the different kind of real numbers in the world. Rational, irrational. Rational numbers can be either integers or fractions. Integers are whole numbers and negative numbers. Whole numbers are 0. And then we also have the natural numbers. So here's your little box of irrational numbers. Those are numbers that can't be expressed as a fraction like pi. And then in the inside here's your natural numbers because many years ago, thousands of years ago, people only counted by positive numbers, things they could see. They didn't have a concept of 0, so they would start at 1. But then things changed, and we got the idea that there's an idea of 0, and so now we would call those the whole numbers. And then as math advanced, then we thought about negative numbers, and so the integers contain all the negatives, 0, and all the positives. And after that, we figured out the rational numbers, which are numbers that can be expressed in fraction form. Okay, so we're going to focus on imaginary numbers, the other branch of the number system. So before we do that, I want to just, if you can listen for a minute, I want you to remember the difference between even and odd roots with respect to negative values. So the square root of 25, we all know the answer to that is 5. The reason is because there's a pair of matching 5s and out comes 5. But square root of negative 25 could not be written in matching numbers because negative 5 times 5, they don't match. So we're going to tackle this problem today to get an answer. So that's what today is about. Now, what about a cubed root with a negative number? So as long as this is odd, we can do a negative number because you have 3 of the same number that multiplies to negative 8. Negative 2 times negative 2 is a 4, times the back negative 2 is a negative 8. So 3 of the same matching numbers, so the cubed root of negative 8 is a negative 2. So as long as this is odd, there's nothing special. But today we're going to tackle when we have an even root, square root in particular. We're going to figure out what this answer is today. Okay, so I represents an imaginary, number. The value of I, just like pi, is worth approximately 3.14. I is worth something, and it is worth the square root of negative 1. Now, we're not going to use I squared today, but just so your notes are full, that's worth the plain negative 1. But you don't have to worry about it. Today, it's all about square root of negative 1. I have a bit of a typo here. This radical symbol in the back should not be here, so I'm going to erase it. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we're going to do to simplify expressions with I is we're going to break up negative 49. Remember, this is a square root. We're going to break it up into 49 times negative 1. Isn't 49 times negative 1 the same as what we started with, the square root of negative 49? We're allowed to break those up. And then we can get a final answer. So how much is the square root of 49? 7. How much is the square root of negative 1 worth? It's worth I. So out pops an I. And that's our final answer. No more radical left. I know that there's a little radical on yours, and that's a typo. So 7i. So let's practice that for a minute. You can just listen for a second. What would the square root of negative 25 be? Break it up. It's going to be 25 times negative 1. Square root of 25 is worth 5. Square root of negative 1 equals I. So for this back part, out pops I. And that's the final answer, 5i. Let me try another one for you. Just erase this real quick. It's the square root of negative 9. So square root of 9 is 3. Square root of the negative 1, out pops I. Right? So square root of 9, square root of negative 1. Out pops I for that negative sign. That's what most kids think of. For this negative sign, out pops the I. So let's practice a couple. Okay, so let's do this one. Example 3. Let's skip. What's the square root of negative 36? You should know the answer already. It's equal to 6i. Because square root of 36, break them up. Square root of negative 1, out pops 6. For this, out pops I. Okay? Now, what about example 4? When we have a fraction, sometimes we can go ahead and do that inside division. We can write it as one fraction. Do that division. That would be the square root of negative 5. Now, you're not allowed to leave a negative inside the radical. So we're going to break this up into square root negative 1, square root 5, and out pops I for this one. In stays rad 5. And that's our final answer. So square root of negative 5 is I, rad 5, because you have to pop out the I for the negative. You're not allowed to leave the negative in anymore, since now you know that you can take it out as I. Okay, well, for the square root 75, we have to also break up the 75. So think quarters. So 25 times 3, negative 25 times 3. Now, hopefully you know already what the square root of negative 25 is. I'm just going to make this a little bit neater. So who's out and who's in? If you need to think about it all separate, it's negative 1 times 25 times 3. So who's out and who's in? So 25, out is 5. Square root of negative 1, out is I. 3 has to stay in. That's our final answer. Let's do it again on the next one. Negative 28, we have to break it up. So that can be negative 4 times 7. So what pops out for square root of negative 4? Who's out and who's in? Do you know what to write for square root of negative 4? Hopefully you know square root of 4 is 2. The negative pops out at I, and 7 stays in. I'm going to draw that out for you. So that can be written as negative 1 times 4 times 7. All right? In case you needed that. So negative square root of negative 1 comes out as I. Square root of 4 comes out as 2, and 7 has to stay in. Pretty easy, huh? Now you know what I means in mathematics. It's worth the square root of negative 1. Okay? All right, next slide. So I need you to catch up on missing notes and homework. Start right now and use your time well, okay, for tonight. There's no special homework on the square root with negative numbers. Okay? Thank you, you guys. Have a great day. Catch up on your work.